Hey, it's Liz D'Alto, and this is the Untamed the Wild Soul Woman podcast. From body image, sex, spirituality, money and relationships, to motherhood, creativity, business, communication, and desire, Untamed the Wild Soul Woman is the place to come for real stories and powerful advice to help you reclaim and redefine womanhood in the 21st century. What's up, wild ones? Welcome to episode number 175 of the Untamed the Wild Soul podcast. I cannot believe we're 25 episodes away from hitting the 200 mark. That is ridiculous to me. This is so much fun. I want to do it forever. Maybe I will. Anyway, today's guest is a friend of mine, Srini Rao. I am excited to tell you about him in a moment, but before I do, I want to invite you to the free Wild Soul Summer School. School is still in session for another month, and you will actually be able to access all of the sessions in the series, of which there are 10 through the middle of August here in 2017. What I'm doing is I pay attention to all of your comments. I read your messages. I know you email me sometimes, leave comments in the Facebook groups. I'm always so curious as to what resonates for you when you listen to the podcast. Therefore, I am intimately familiar with what does. Your questions, your insights, your ahas, the places where you're wanting to go deeper, the places where things aren't quite clicking yet, and maybe you just need some puzzle pieces to put into place for you. So Wild Soul Summer School addresses all of that. We are addressing the topics that come up frequently on the podcast. It is juicy, juicy stuff. I'm doing it on my Facebook page at facebook.com/Elizabeth D'Alto in the format of short 15 to 20 minute Facebook Live videos every Wednesday at noon Pacific time. Once I am done with the live video, it stays up, recorded on my Facebook page, and we put it into a blog post. So you can also check out untameyourself.com, and the blog post will be there as well. So here's the deal. I lastly create a freebie for you that goes with each and every installment of Wild Soul Summer School. So there's worksheets, there's tutorials, there's some helpful videos to really help you integrate and implement all the stuff that we talk about here. Since I know, again, so many of you get a lot out of the show, which really makes me happy because I'm happy to continue investing the time, energy, and attention into this, knowing that is useful for you women. So check that out by following my Facebook page, facebook.com/Elizabeth D'Alto. Now for today's episode. I loved having this conversation so much, and I think you're all really going to dig it too. Today's guest, Srini Rao, is an author and the host of the Unmistakable Creative podcast. He's someone who not only has personal chops and experience when it comes to developing creative processes and creating habits for effectiveness and productivity, but he's a real student of the two as well. Between his own studies and interviewing over 700 people himself, he provides a ton of interesting and useful perspective in this episode. From cultural expectations and differences to relating his passion and dedication to surfing to creativity and finding creative flow in spite of having ADD and bouts with depression. So we went really deep in this conversation. Enjoy, and be sure to let me know what you think. Here today with Srini Rao, who hosts his own incredible podcast, The Unmistakable Creative, which you all already heard me mention in the intro. But Srini, first question for all of our gentlemen. What do you love about being a man?
All right. So I've thought about this question because I knew you were going to ask it. And I have to answer this from the perspective the culture that I grew up in, because I think that, when you grow up in Indian culture, you actually see a very much a double standard. Like, women have to deal with a whole world of just nonsense that a lot of guys don't have to deal with when you grow up in the Indian culture. Like, especially in my parents' generation, they're forced into marriages that they didn't necessarily choose. There's an immense amount of pressure to cross off, sort of societally approved checkboxes, right? Like, be married by a certain age, have kids by a certain age. Now, as an Indian guy, you still do that, but it's nowhere as near as bad as it is for an Indian girl. If you're an Indian girl who's my same sort of, status that it's sacrilegious. I mean, it's so tough and it's so brutal from the community. Nobody openly says it, but you feel constantly judged by that. And so I think that, I guess if I could say that I like one thing about being a guy is I don't have to deal with that at nearly the same level that I see women having to deal with it.
I appreciate your perspective coming from a cultural standpoint, because this is one of the reasons why I asked this question, because everyone's experience is so different based on, you know, the environment you grew up in, whether it was another culture or whether it was like this Americanized culture, but, you know, then your family came over here. And then there's a whole other slew of things that come up for people who were first generation in this country trying to adjust to this really interesting
well, you know, if you're an immigrant kid and you're the older of the two kids, you're kind of the experiment. Like everything that your parents are going to screw up is going to be screwed up on you. So that way they can correct the mistake. Like my sister and I were very different people in high school. Like she was popular. She was cool. She was friends with, you know, jocks, cheerleaders, smart people. She was the editor in chief of her newspaper. I mean, we walked through the mall at Christmas time once. You know, after her first semester in college, and we couldn't get into somebody. Like I have nowhere near that high school experience. It was completely different because, you know, my parents kind of like I got the sort of stricter upbringing. And by the time she was in high school, like, I mean, the kinds of things she got away with, I would have never been allowed to leave the house again if I had done those things. I mean, she even threw a party at my parents' house once when she came home from college. She mentioned to a few friends that, hey, after the homecoming game, we're going to have a get together at my house. And something like 400 people showed up while my parents were there. OK, and they were smoking pot in the backyard. They were drinking. And my sister was like, I didn't plan this. Just go upstairs and I'll take care of it. And they did. And not only that, then that was Friday and she went back to Berkeley on Sunday. So she completely got away with something. If I had pulled that, like that would have been it. My parents would have never let me leave the house. So, you know, you get these very different experiences if you're the older of an immigrant, you know, family. The other thing is, you know, the other thing you notice is the relationship dynamic. Like I think I've seen my parents kiss each other once and it freaked me out big when I saw it. I was like, oh, I'm like, this is, you know, it's one of those moments where you're like, I wish I could unsee that. But at the same time, like, you're kind of like, okay, it would have been nicer if that had just been the norm. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm super curious and like, there's no way of knowing. So just your opinion, granted what you shared about the culturally different treatment of men and women in your background, were your parents tougher on you because they're of any kind of expectation of like the role you're in air quotes supposed to play in society as a man, or did that not make a difference, do you think? I
don't know that they were any tougher on me than they were on my sister. I mean, I think if you looked at it through the lens of expectations, my sister has satisfied all of their expectations. She's like the poster child for being a perfect Indian kid. She was the chief anesthesiology resident at Yale, and she just finished up a fellowship at UCLA. So like, you know, she's pretty much done everything that one of my best friends from college, who was also a Harvard neurosurgery resident, he said, dude, he's like, your sister is like every Indian parent's dream come true. And I'm like every Indian parent's nightmare come true because I wanted nothing to do with any of those things. So I don't know that I got, you know, anywhere near, like, I don't think I had that same level of expectation, but I just see it overall as a culture. I think it's really, you know, if I had a choice to be an Indian man or an Indian woman in the culture that I grew up in, I would absolutely choose being an Indian man. Yeah.
Yeah. There's, are you a fan of Louis C.K.?
I know. Yeah, I know as well.
I feel like we've brought this up on the podcast before, but Louis C.K. has this one skit where what I love about comedians like Louis C.K. is they'll bring up real shit in the world, but make a joke about it, but make a really good point.
Yeah.
Enfolded in the joke. And so one of the things he said was like at any point in history, like if he had the option to like come back as anything, he's like, the only thing that you could be at any point in history that would be like safe and okay is white man. He's like, I would choose it again every time. What's cool now, I actually think our culture being a woman, not necessarily with a race attached to it. This is a really incredible time to be a woman, but literally backwards in time, it was really the only safe option anywhere on the planet, you know? So super, super interesting there.
I mean, well, and you know, the minority is something that I don't think anybody can really understand unless they've experienced it themselves, right? Totally. Like I can sit here and I can tell it to you. You know, Jonathan Fields asked me a similar question about the culture that I grew up in. You know, like, you know, does this culture of expectations, you know, how does it inform the way you live your life? Because I know that you know, you're not a person who doesn't care at all what anybody thinks. Of course, you care about what your family thinks, and you know, no matter how many blog posts you write about it, how many podcasts you read. The reality is that until somebody has actually lived it or, had sort of a front row seat to it, they won't entirely understand what it's like. So like if you were, for example, dating an Indian guy, you would actually have a much deeper view into this than you otherwise would.
Yeah.
And that's, that's just the reality of it, is that you can't really, no matter how much I try to explain it, until you see it, you won't really understand it.
I really appreciate this point, because even as much effort or as empathetic as anyone can ever be, or every effort to like put yourself in somebody else's shoes, we can have these conversations to give people insight. But I think it's a super valid point that unless you've lived it yourself or have a front row seat to it, because, I've had so many friends. I grew up in New York, like, and on the East Coast. I've had so many friends in other cultures. So getting to see how other people operate, and, people even coming into my culture of just being like Italian and Puerto Rican, which is like very similar, like very outgoing, very passionate, very affectionate in a lot of ways. And people being like, wow, your parents just say that to you? Like, it's super funny. Friends who come from cultures where, everything gets swept under the rug. People don't talk about that stuff. And sometimes I think that's why I shock people sometimes, is because they're like, wait, you just said that? Like, most people just think that. They don't say it. And it's like, but what do you mean? We just say whatever. So, I love those cultural differences.
And you and I live in really kind of a lot of ways, pretty much a white bubble, right? Like, just walk around North County, San Diego. And I remember, I think, like, if you see an Indian person surfing, you're like, holy shit, I've just found an endangered species. I should call the Humane Society. You just don't. Like, I mean, it's rare. I remember the first time I was in a bar in Encinitas and I saw a group of Indian people walking. I was like, there's no way they live here. I can't believe I've been here for 5 months and I've never seen more than one or two Indian people. Yeah,
this is why I travel a lot, because I need to get out of that bubble. Actually, a really good friend of mine is an African-American man who was living in our community for a while. And every once in a while, he'd message me. He's like, hey, I'm going to dinner. What do you think's the under-over on how many black people there are going to be in this place? And he'd count. He'd be like, there's 7,
Yeah.
And that's like, it's funny and it's not, it makes it makes me uncomfortable to spend too much time in the bubble, because it's really easy to forget that, like, outside of like watching the news and things, which I don't feel like is a good source, to like actually go, even being here, I'm in Hawaii right now as we're recording this interview. The culture's so different. There's so much like, and it just feels, and it's so different, and it's cool, and it's so much more, rural might not be the right word, but community oriented. Like, I watched a girl hitchhike this morning. A young girl, I posted about this on Facebook, threw out her thumb, a man picked her up, and they drove off, and I was like, no way. Like,
that would never happen here.
No. And my inner New Yorker, right? Even actually hearing my dad's voice be like, are you fucking kidding me? Don't you ever get in a car with anyone.
Yeah.
But, okay, so I want to go back, because you brought this up around the thing of expectation, where you were saying you were like every Indian parent's nightmare, because you were just like not into following the rules, following the standards.
Sure,
I know part of your story is that you tried and that really didn't go well. And so you have this book, and I love how in the book you use surfing, which is a huge passion of yours and skill now that you've been working on for many years, to kind of walk people through the art of mastery, which is, an ever evolving thing. So start us there. Can you just give people a little bit of background on where you were at in your life when you started surfing and the journey it's taken you on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was at I was on a study abroad program in Brazil. It was the second semester of my business school program. And it was 2 days before I was about to come home. And most of my friends who were supposed to stay with me ended up going home early because they all ran out of money. So I was stuck, with this guy that I didn't have a whole lot in common with. We didn't really seem to gel, but he liked to surf and I was kind of sick of sitting on the beach and drinking. So the last day I was there, I ended up, renting a surfboard from some old Argentinian dude who looked like Steven Tyler and, ended up surfing. And I actually stood up, and I stood up again and again. I was like, wow, this isn't a fluke. I actually it clicked. I mean, of course, at that time, it probably seemed more impressive than it actually was. Like, I was probably just standing in whitewater. But, one of the things that it did was that it created this incredible sense of lightness and joy that it brought to my life that I had never felt before. Like I'd had a bad case of what's called IBS, which is a digestive disorder that there's literally you go to a doctor and they're like, there's nothing wrong with you. The effects of the medications are often the same things that they cure. Like you listen to a commercial for some of this medication. It's like, it may cause constipation, diarrhea, and stomach problems. I'm like, how the fuck is that possible? That's what it's supposed to cure. So anyways, surfing actually turned out to be really in a lot of ways a cure for that. That was one thing that kind of drew me to it. And I got back and I went to business school at Pepperdine. So I was like, wow, I'm right near the beach. I should be doing this, pretty much daily. So, I got my financial aid check. I didn't go to the bookstore. Instead, I went to the surf shop. I bought a board and a wetsuit, and I've been surfing ever since. But the other thing that happened that was kind of informative was that I didn't have a job when I graduated business school. And that was in April of 2009, which is a shitty time to get out of any sort of school and a really bad time to try to start a career. And so I needed something to keep me from going insane, because I was watching all my classmates and I was thinking, this has got to be really bad for you to be on the internet all day long, searching for jobs, applying to jobs. Like, that's just an incredibly inefficient use of time in my mind. So what I would do is I would write for an hour every morning. I would submit a resume or two based on whatever I saw, made sense. And then I would go to the beach and I would surf from, 7 in the morning till 1 or 2 in the afternoon. And, I quickly realized, I was like, wow, this is a really great hobby for an unemployed person, because it takes up a shitload of time and it doesn't cost any money. Mm-hmm. And not only that, I think one of the most interesting pieces of advice that I ever got was probably 3 to 4 weeks into starting the first blog that I ever started. I interviewed this guy named Peter Bregman, and he said the worst thing that you can do when you're unemployed is to spend all of your time looking for a job. And that sounds really counterintuitive when, you're like, okay, I'm unemployed. Why would I spend my time doing anything else? But if you dissect it a little further, it actually makes sense, because you need something that isn't like this constant negative reinforcement of what's wrong in your life.
Totally.
And so surfing became that thing that was a constant positive reinforcement, to the point where I started scheduling job interviews around surf conditions. I would take phone interviews at the beach. I would tell people that I couldn't do morning interviews anymore. And to this day, if you try to meet me, I mean, hell, you and I met up once for drinks, and I will always suggest that we meet at the beach for several reasons. One, if I think you suck, at least I can get in a surf session. Like, if our, conversation is crappy. Fortunately, everybody I've met at the beach has been really cool, but and it's a beautiful place to meet. So, and literally, you talk to any of my friends, if you ask my friend Laura, she'll tell you the same thing. I think I met her at the exact same spot I met you for the first time on a beach. I was like Huntington Beach at the pier, because at the time that's where I was living closer to there. That's pretty much, kind of how it all started. And, here we are. God, at the end of this year, it's going to be 9 years.
So cool.
I don't think I've ever done anything that long in my life. I've never had a job that long. So.
Oh, it's your longest standing commitment. You and surfing. Yeah. Happy anniversary.
Exactly.
So I'm so glad we're having
I can't say the same about any girlfriend.
Your tone when you said that was so funny. Amazing delivery. So I'm so glad we're having this conversation now, because I'm in Hawaii, and one of the reasons I came here is to be in the ocean. So I rented a paddleboard. I'm not much of a surfer. You and I have talked about this, but I really like paddleboarding. But I also came to swim. And the other day, for the first time, I got to swim in the ocean with dolphins, with a friggin' pod of dolphins. It was unbelievable. But I was with friends. I met some friends. Actually, the miracle of social media, I had posted when I was coming here, all I want to do is be in the water or whatever. And a woman was like, hey, do you want to swim with dolphins? I was like, yeah. And this is what she does. And I'm like, yes, this is the moment I've been waiting for. I needed a guide. To me, the ocean is very scary. It's very amazing, but it's very scary because things can change in the blink of an eye. I don't know what to look for. And so I'm super curious about your experience of getting to know the ocean and learning to read the ocean. And how did you learn? Because I'm more interested in how people learn new things and how people go about mastery and skill development. So can you talk about that?
Yeah. So, I think that there's a lot of things that make surfing very unusual in terms of a skill that you have to develop. The biggest one being the fact that it is in a medium that is constantly changing, right? Yeah. Every single time you go, it's different, which is what makes it so damn hard to get good, because you can have days that are really nice and beautiful and glassy and perfect waves rolling through. And you can have days where you are literally just taking one wave after another on the head. And, I've had days when I couldn't even get past the whitewater, and I'm like, all right, to hell with it. It's not meant to be today.
So wait, pause there for a second.
Yes.
What what's going through your mind? Like, what's going through your emotions when that's your day? I've had a lot of those days on the paddleboard where I'm like, I can't even get past the break. This thing's kicking my ass.
The thing is, at this point, it's rare that happens. Okay. But I think the real mindset is, okay, you know what? I've done this for 9 years now, and to this day, I still have bad days.
Yeah.
The only thing that matters is that I'm showing up. Like, at least I put in a bit of effort and tried. And that's a very perfect parallel for creative work, right? Because when you sit down to do something like write or work on something creative, like you really have no control over how it's going to turn out. You have to actually snap the thing that you said you were going to do. So that's one thing I would say. So as far as what goes through your mind, don't get me wrong. It's not that it's not frustrating. Like, you absolutely are annoyed. You're like, okay, what the hell? I just put on a wetsuit for all this. And, now I have to go back to my car kind of, with my head hung and be like, what a waste of 2 hours just trying to get past the break. And then, there are days where you just get beat up. I mean, you're taking, you're constantly in the impact zone, taking one wave after another on the head. The currents are really strong. So you paddle down the beach one way. Next thing you know, you're like 200. You paddle out at one spot. Next thing you're like 200 yards to the left or to the right. Like, how did I end up all the way over here?
Yeah.
It's the way I described it to a friend. A friend asked me, he's like, how do you get good at reading waves? And I said, well, there's really no, you can't read anything about it. You can't watch a bunch of videos. None of that. You might learn a thing or two, because what happens is it's a bit, the metaphor I always use is it's a bit like standing in two different spots in the same room, right? Like, once you stand in a different spot, the view changes. Like, you see things that you didn't see before. So everything that you're experiencing while you're standing on shore is an inaccurate assessment of what's actually happening, because everything changes the moment you get into the water.
It's so true. Yesterday I went to try this beach, and I'm looking and I'm like, oh yeah, it's super glassy, it's calm. And I'm even like asking some local people, where's the best spot to get in? Because there's a lot of snorkeling, a lot of rocks. There's some sea urchin, which I learned is purple, and don't step on that shit. So not because I stepped on it, but because an amazing man warned me. Thank God. And what's funny is I'd gone up to the lifeguard's ass, and the lifeguard's like, oh yeah, just get in anywhere. And I was talking to this guy, he's like, they don't give a shit. Like, go here, this is safe, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, thank you so much. And as soon as I get in the water, I'm out there and I'm like, damn, there's waves breaking out here. Like, totally different experience when you're up in there. But what I realized, and I think some of my women could probably relate to this, is I, in my life, have put myself in physical and other forms of danger or peril or potential risk for the sake of doing something that I wasn't quite ready to do yet. And it was very like, the hubris, like the ego of being like, well, I can do this. Like, got to lean into your edges and face your fears. And I'm like, or I could not die today. I tried. I went out there. I went back and forth a little bit in the safe zone. I'm like, all right, I put some time in on the board. And then I came in and I watched, and I like really did my best to be patient. I even turned around once when there was like a break was coming, and I'm like, oh, not going to get caught in that. And I was more proud of myself for taking care of myself and putting my safety first than I was that I like did something daring that day. You know what I mean? I'm like, maybe this is a sign of getting older, that I'm like, better safe than sorry.
Well, and that's a real balancing act, because, like if you've done any research or read any of the stuff that Stephen Kotler or Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi have done on flow, like flow occurs at what they call the mid spot, right? The sweet spot between boredom and anxiety, right? You don't want something that's going to be so difficult that it paralyzes you, but you don't want something so easy that you'll be bored.
Right.
And the reason this is fresh on my mind is, I was writing about this morning about, how do you produce flow on a daily basis? And like if you ask me why I surf, why I snowboard, why I do any of the things that I do, it almost all comes back to flow. Like, I'm like, I like this high. I like this incredible rush, and I want to feel as much of it as possible, because not only is it an incredible high, it produces a lot of great work. I had a friend who told me, he's like, surfing is the greatest natural high in the world. And, having done my fair share of experiments with unnatural highs, I can tell you that's true. Like if I had the choice between those or surfing, I would always choose surfing, because it really is one of those things that produces. I think, it's funny because when you listen to surfers talk, if you've never experienced it, they sound insane. It sounds really crazy that somebody could say, how is it that something that looks this annoying at moments could be so rewarding? But it just is. Like, the moment you drop into a wave, everything changes. Like, you can have a shitty day turn into a great day just like that. And that's why I do it, and that's why I'll do it for the rest of my life. I mean, I met a guy who was 68 years old in the water yesterday. I thought, if I'm surfing when I'm 68, that'll be a good life.
That's amazing. I think about how my grandparents were deteriorating when they were 68 years old. To be able to like get in the water and paddle and do such physical cool things, let alone be able to just like walk up a flight of stairs. Congratulations. So I love, you know, you've written a whole book about this, and I love all the parallels. And I hope as people are listening, and maybe you go back and you re-listen from this perspective of everything that Srini is describing in like the art of learning surfing and just continuing to show up can be applied to literally anything, any creative endeavor, or any interest or any hobby or whatever. And you talk about that a lot in the book. So can we chat about habits? I feel like there's all this, really sexy marketing around 21 days, 30 days. But like, I'm sorry, no lifelong sustainable habit happens in 21 or 30 days. So you've now been doing this for 9 years. School us. How and why do you keep showing up? I think you've covered the why, so the how. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about the how, because I mean, I literally have just finished writing a book on this. So there's a lot that goes into it. I mean, you made a really good point in that anything that you're going to do for the rest of your life, you're probably not going to master it in 21 days. The notion that you will is a bit ridiculous. I mean, maybe the habit will stick after 21 days. But let's talk about where people go wrong. So I think the easiest example to use. So now we've talked about surfing. Let's talk specifically about one that's probably much more relevant to your listeners, which is writing. So I write 1,000 words every morning. It's the first thing I do when I wake up. I don't turn on any devices. I don't, check email. I don't get on social media. I don't do interviews, nothing. That is like sort of at this point. Now, there are a lot of really interesting intricacies that nobody sees because I don't share everything that I create. Like what most people don't realize is that 90% of everything I create is just complete crap. Like I would, be humiliated to put it out into the world. But the thing is, when you're doing it so consistently, it doesn't matter that 90% is crap because you have so much of it that you only need a small amount. I think it was Adam Grant in his research who actually found that it wasn't necessarily the quality of the work, but your cumulative output that actually mattered much more. When you have a habit like 1,000 words a day, your cumulative output, if you let's say you did that every day for a year, that's the equivalent of like 6 books. Now, of course, nobody writes 6 books in a year, especially because, a good amount of those words are lousy. But let's talk about the actual development of the habit, because there's a lot of behavioral science that goes into developing a habit, and a lot of it is really small stuff. We've literally just finished recording an entire course about this stuff with my content strategist, Kingshuk, who you met. And it was interesting because as we were recording it, he found his own behavior starting to change as a result of everything that he was hearing. Totally cool. Okay, it's not just me as a test case. Like this is real. Cool. And a good amount of this is based in actual behavioral science research. So let's talk about sort of setup, because what you're doing before you sit down to do this thing or follow through on this habit matters just as much as what you do when you actually sit down for the habit. So couple of things that are worth noting. So the first concept that I think people really have to get their heads around is this notion of activation energy, which is based on the work of a happiness researcher named Sean Achor. Wrote an amazing book called The Happiness Advantage. In fact, that book I directly credit my 1,000-word habit. Everything I learned about how to develop new habits came from that book, even though it's a book about happiness. So the idea behind activation energy is that you increase your activation energy for the things that you want to get done, and you decrease the activation. It's the activation energy for the things that you want to avoid, and you decrease the activation energy for the things that you want to get done. Now, what is activation energy? It's the amount of effort required to actually get started on that particular thing. So, simple example, I put my journal out on my desk the night before, right before I go to sleep. And that way, just the fact that I don't have to go get a pen, I don't have to get my journal and, do anything else, like I've eliminated a number of steps that stand between me and the thing that I want to follow through on. So that increases the likelihood that you'll follow through on it. So it's a bit like, putting your gym clothes or your shoes by the door if you want to start running at 6 a.m. You're much more likely to if you see them in your line of sight. So that's a really simple sort of concept that's really important. Another thing I think it's hard for us to talk about habits without talking about focus, because really we are in a situation where distraction is really an epidemic at this point.
It's massive.
It's really, really maddening. And, like having had issues with depression, I have some serious concerns about what will happen to a younger generation who is addicted to devices.
Yeah.
I had to really, where I wasn't even addicted. Like I was pretty good about this stuff, but where it started to really affect me was sleep deprivation. And if you know anything about depression, like those two things get in. Like if you can't sleep, you become depressed. And if you're depressed, you can't sleep. So it's this vicious cycle. And one of the first things I thought about was, okay, what are my digital habits like? Where do I have bad focus? And, a lot of it came to, okay, turning off this stuff in the evening, like, shut it down like at 7 o'clock, because I notice a huge difference in my ability to focus if I turn things off by 7 or 8 p.m. Like, so for example, this morning I wrote for an hour and a half and I shut down everything at 7 last night. Now, if I did on the days that I don't do that, like my willpower is actually much lower.
Totally.
You see, the thing that happens that, people don't realize is that when you're doing all this, like, digital, Facebooking, Googling things, what's happening is that you're actually making decisions throughout that entire time. Like they seem like inconsequential decisions, which they are. They're pretty much meaningless decisions. But the problem is that they are still taxing your brain, resulting in decision fatigue and reducing your willpower, which makes it really hard to actually sit down in the morning when you work. So
pause for a second, because this is so brilliant. I had not heard this before, and it makes so much sense. How many decisions, like every click, every scroll, every choice to like go deeper in something, go into a Facebook group, respond to something, that is another choice, and therefore is contributing mildly but totally cumulatively to decision fatigue. Oh my God, I'm loving this, because I'm in a phase right now where when I travel and I'm not home and I don't have as much immediate connection to humans, I notice myself reaching more for social media, for Facebook, going into my Facebook groups and breaking my good, like 2 or 3 times a day only habit. So
yeah, I'm like that too when I travel, by the way. Like that's about the only time, like I don't have social media apps on my phone other than Instagram, because that's the only way you can use it.
Quick break in the show to let you all know that the Wild Soul Movement virtual program will reopen for enrollment in the month of July 7th through August 4th. You'll be able to join the class of 2017. If you're not familiar with Wild Soul Movement, you can head on over to wildsoulmovement.com/waitlist so you can be the first to know when the program reopens and when all the information is available for you. I'm letting you know this now so that you can get on that waitlist, because for those who join us between July 7th and July 10th, I have a special early bird action taker bonus. It's a little bonus course and bonus integration calls with me that I'm super, super excited to spend some extra time with those action-taking women, the women who are ready to commit to themselves, who are into the deep work that we do in Wild Soul Movement. And in case you don't know about Wild Soul Movement, there's 4 main topics that we work through: surrender and release, trust and receiving, wild dreaming and desire, and love and creation. The entire goal of the program is for you to become the living, breathing embodiment of feminine truth and power, to implement and integrate so many of the things we talk about here on the show, but through your body, through connecting with your soul's wisdom and your own truth. It is so freaking juicy. I've been running this program for almost 4 years now. There is alumni in our Facebook group. There's women who've been doing it now almost all 4 years. So it's a really juicy, a really rich experience. So again, if you're interested in that and you want to take advantage of those bonuses, head on over to wildsoulmovement.com/waitlist so you will be the first to know when we open things up on July 7th. Now back to the show.
But yeah, so you get, sort of this decision fatigue. So another thing I do is I block distracting websites. There's multiple tools that do this, like Rescue Time, Hey Focus is free. And, I realized I'd stopped doing this, which is why I was starting to run into problems. But I do that the night before because, like the thing is, you're kind of, again, depending on willpower to say, okay, I won't give in. Just the fact that you have to go through and block the distraction in the morning, that makes it likely that you'll give into the distraction. So I set it up to be blocked. Everything is blocked for 13 or 14 hours at a time. That's so good. That way, when I wake up, everything is done. Another thing that's, this varies from person to person. Like I know there are people who are night owls, so this will be a little different for them. But I think the overwhelming majority of the population are not night owls. I actually think most people do their best work early in the morning for several reasons. We've talked about sleep. When you're well rested, you have much higher willpower, so your ability to focus is going to be much sharper. You also haven't taken in a flood of information already. I'm a big believer that excessive consumption has a really negative impact on creativity because,
Huge.
And if you think about it, like what do people who are in, tribes like yours do? They, subscribe to 100 podcasts, they read 100 newsletters, and funny enough, the sad part of this is, it's good because they're educating themselves and there's value. I'm not saying you should unsubscribe to, podcasts, particularly mine or Liz's, but, had to put that in there. But what I am saying is that, people aren't deliberate enough about their consumption habits. Like so often you've subscribed to things, just to get some free download and you didn't really want to subscribe. You just wanted the free download, but you're still subscribed to the thing. Yeah. And, most people, if they were very honest with themselves about sort of the information that is flowing into their world, most of it is there by default. It's not there deliberately. It's not been there. It's not there by design, and when it's there by design, you end up focusing, very much on what's essential. So focus is a really, really big thing. Cal Newport talks about this concept of deep work, which, is this ability to focus on a cognitively demanding task for an extended period of time. And he's absolutely right that it is really a 21st century superpower. So few people have it. And if you can develop it, it gives you a huge edge. This is how books get written. This is how, prolific writers create what they do. And if you look at people, like the Ryan Holidays of the world, it's very clear that deep work is a very big part of their life. Like if you look at anything that he writes, even if it's an article, it's very well thought out. It's very thought provoking. It's well researched. You can tell a lot of work had to go into that in order to get it to that point. And, an example, one of the things that we've done recently is kind of changed up our content strategy at the advice of our content strategist. He said, I want you to do deeper dives and spend more than a week on each article. And, the results kind of speak for themselves. We went from 30,000 views on, our Medium content, in April to 170,000 in May. That's, because the problem is we're seeing less and less content that's of depth because of attention span. And so if you can create things that are of depth, that is really, really valuable. It's a valuable skill. It creates – the other thing is when you have something that is depth, right, especially, kind of like the conversations that you have on this podcast, you create a much more emotionally engaging experience for other people with what you've created when they experience whatever your art is or whatever your, contribution to the world is. And if you create a very emotionally engaging experience for them, they're going to be much more likely to stick. We don't talk enough about retention of people's attention as much as do things like, hey, how many people visited? It's like, well, how many people stuck around? That matters probably more. Yeah.
I love this conversation so much. Oh, sorry. You paused a little bit in there, but it was the internet, not you. Keep going.
No worries. So, we've talked about activation energy. We've talked about blocking out distractions. I think the final piece of this is what we haven't talked about is how you actually do this, right? So you've taken all these sort of measures, and this is something we spent a little bit of time talking about in the course that we've just started. We've just finished recording, and that is most people make habits unsustainable. We talked about 21 days at the beginning, so. If you're the problem is this is the example that I used when I was explaining it in our course. I said, I recently started teaching myself how to play the guitar, and it's pretty painful. Like if you see my videos on Instagram, you can see that I kind of suck, right? But if I'd said, I want to get this guitar this week and I want to play the opening guitar riff to Sweet Child of Mine next week, that would be ridiculous. I mean, I don't think that's impossible. I think probably with the right amount of teachers and training, that could happen. But for most people, that kind of approach is incredibly unsustainable. So what happens is you start this thing with all this enthusiasm, like, hey, I'm going to, be on this crazy new diet. It's so intense that I can't sustain it. It's like you give up after 3 days or, you try the same thing. So, people will come to me and it's like, hey, I'm going to start writing 1,000 words. And it's like, well, do you do this every day? No. I'm like, all right, well, then don't try to do it every day. Don't try to write 1,000 words. Start small and build your way up. So that's the other thing I think is that when it comes to developing habits, there's a big problem. Here's the biggest problem, right, is the people who write about this stuff we kind of, you look at us and you say, okay, well, they do it, so I'll just do it exactly the way they did it. And of course, what we leave out of it is, oh, by the way, it didn't start out like this. Like I didn't start out surfing 6-foot days. I started out riding whitewater, and that's kind of maybe the best metaphor.
Yeah. And also we're all so different. So
totally.
I love bringing up, the different typologies, whether it's Myers-Briggs or human design, or people are into astrology or their Enneagram. And I'm not into all of these subjective sciences as a way to like put people into boxes, but the more that we can understand ourselves and how we function and how we operate, two things. We can choose wisely. We can go, okay, that sounds great. And I'm glad that works for you, Srini, but it's not in my nature. Like it would literally be like pushing a boulder up a hill. There has to be a more efficient way or effective way for someone who's built like me to do this, or this, right? And then we can kind of research.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we don't have to beat ourselves up. Sometimes we're like, well, it works for him. And this is like massive in the diet industry, right? We think we're the worst person in the world when we can't do friggin' the whole 30. And then we're like, but wait, I don't actually want to eat that much meat every day, or, whatever the hell it is. So, and I appreciate you talking about essentially layering on the foundation of the habit. So something you said when you mentioned I think you said it was Cal Newport, the deep work. Was that Cal Newport?
Yeah.
You talked about doing something for an extended period of time, and depending on where someone is starting, an extended period of time is going to be different. Like, so for someone, it might be 15 minutes, and then you work your way up to 20, 30, 40, an hour, and then maybe you could sit down for a couple hours at a stretch. Maybe that's not your nature anyway, but there's so much trial and error here.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point and worth commenting on. I mean, you really kind of have to become a student of your own behavior and really look at, okay, what works for you and cherry pick things, So like I have to do some of these things mainly because I'm super ADD. Like I don't have the ability to sit down and work for 2 to 3 hours. So I have to take like all these precautions to make sure that I get the most out of an hour or two, because after 2 hours, my attention span is done. Like we even, I think there's a post on Medium about this where we titled How I Get Shit Done Despite Having ADD. Yeah. This is what you can learn from my experiences. And it's, and I've optimized everything I do for the fact that I have an incredibly short attention span. I just don't do well. And this is why I can't have a normal job, because sitting in an office all day would drive me fucking crazy.
I can't. I'm with you. I cannot do it. My mom has asked me so many times, what would you do if you had to go to a normal job? I'm like, we're never going to have to know.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's, I think that, you made a good point in that I think you kind of have to take, what might work for you. Like you got to remember that a good amount of all these things that I've developed and all these habits and systems and routines are the result of, reading literally hundreds of books, 700 interviews with, social science researchers, taking something from every single person. I mean, and that's really, at the end of the day, like the core message of Unmistakable is, okay, how do you take, what you've learned from other people and, you look at it sort of as a recipe, right? In a kitchen, you mix up ingredients that other people have provided to create dishes of your own that nobody could create but you. Yeah. And that's really kind of the way I approach everything.
Yeah. And what's amazing, I was also thinking about some people, the same way you and I are completely not built to work at a regular job, some people are completely not built to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
like the literal amount of uncertainty and risk that's involved, some people are not built to hold that and live in that and get comfortable and be able to make day-to-day decisions and move forward without like losing their shit or just being so anxious and so worried all the time. And so go ahead.
That's one of those things that, you look at the uncertainty, right? I think the income variability is one of the things that most people don't know how to handle. It took me a long time to get my head around that. Then my business partner, Brian, told me something that really changed it forever for me. He said, you realize the highest income earners in the world have tremendous variability in their income, right? I was like, wow. That's good to know. That's useful. It helps you kind of unwind, your story about money. I mean, I think that's one of the things that everybody, like I've found that has been, several years worth of work is unwinding money stories, and kind of, a good amount of it is listening to people who tell me what theirs have been, how they've changed it and all of that. But yeah, that's a big one. The uncertainty is definitely kind of that's one of the biggest things I think is hard for people to handle.
So how have you navigated that during some of the toughest times? I know you and I've known you for years now, so I've seen kind of some of the ups and downs, and we're friends, so I know some of the behind the scenes. And I personally have had so many, it's like the feast and famine phase, right? And I've been in So luckily not for the last 3 years, but I've had those moments when it's like, the timing of this isn't really going to work out for me because the rent is due today and this person's not paying me for 3 more days. How, especially I'm most curious as a person who has dealt with depression, not saying that like you're fragile, but maybe there were times when you were. How did you navigate that either on your own or with the help of others? Because that shit is, it's so real and it's so taxing on the entire system.
Yeah, I mean, depression is gnarly, right? Like you don't, and it's weird because nobody really, if you've never experienced it yourself, it's really hard to understand. Like people just think you're fucking crazy and messed up, which you are. I mean, to them, you know, if they're used to you being a certain way and they've kind of created this model of you in their head and you stop living up to that, you know, this is something that we deal with. You know, if you have a public presence of any sort, there are expectations of what you're like and, you know, what your behavior is like, you know, and that you are the person that they have gotten to know, you know, behind the microphone or behind the words or behind the beautiful website or whatever it is. And when you shatter that expectation in some way, it's real. One, it makes your relationships very challenging. So that's something, you know, I had to comment on that because I think that, you know, often what we do is we place public figures on pedestals, and the moment that they do something that lets us down, we think, oh, well, screw that person. They're horrible. They're evil, blah, 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 whatever. I mean, like, you know, people have said horrible shit about me, people who were, you know, fans of ours. You know, and the thing is, some of it isn't true. Maybe some of it is, you know, and like my job is pretty much to show up and do my work. And that's really all there is to it. But as far as getting through it, there are a couple of things I think that are worth mentioning. So, you know, I think end of 2014, you kind of saw the sort of what I jokingly call the meteoric rise to like stardom, you know, in the span of 6 months with like, you know, Wall Street Journal bestselling book, complete rebrand, you know, sold out event. Like it was like I could do no wrong, you know. And then in the span of like 2 weeks, it all just went to shit. Like, you know, lost a lot of money. You know, a girl that I was seeing broke up with me. You know, like everything all at once. And the weird thing is, I don't think it would have all been as bad if it didn't happen literally within, you know, a span of like a week window. It was like, how the hell did everything that was going well suddenly just go to shit? That seems impossible. So that really kind of sent me into a tailspin that didn't really end. I really thought, okay, you know what? This is shitty. It's bad. I'm sad, whatever. I'm going to pull out of it. By the time I think December rolled around, we had canceled an event that we were supposed to do. We were like literally running on fumes, you know, bailed out business partners, lawyers involved, all sorts of shit. You know, it was ugly. And, you know, like a lot of relationships were damaged in the process, some of which, you know, those relationships will never be repaired. And they're just not meant to be. You know, that's the unfortunate part. Is the weird thing is you know, some of the repercussions of it still affect us to this day. And so I did, you know, at that point, I temporarily moved into some shithole in Carlsbad that I didn't like. My friend Matt Monroe called it a middle-aged youth hostel, which it was like, but with none of the benefits of a youth hostel. So I did, you know, what I didn't want to do, and that was go home to my parents. And you know, like I think people know that there was a period of time I wrote about this, and one of the most recent Medium posts about the 5 things I had to give up to be successful. One of them was financial security, and for me, that meant going home to stay at my parents' house. And you know, the year that I got home, 2 months after I got there, I got my book deal. So it didn't make any sense to leave at that point. I was like, okay, you know what? This is a perfect environment in which to write a book because there's nothing to do here. It's a really boring place to live. If you've never been to Riverside, you're not missing much. So, but you know, the other things, therapy would be one of them. I still to this day take meds because my biggest challenge with it was sleep deprivation, as I mentioned, and without meds, I wouldn't be able to sleep. So, you know, I think the thing that we, in my mind, have really done a huge disservice to with this whole mental health conversation is the stigma that we've attached to it.
Totally.
You know, like I think the self-improvement world and the life coach world and all the sort of spiritual teachers really kind of take attack on the idea of taking meds to fix anything. Although I have to say I did appreciate the fact that Danielle actually, you know, brought up both sides of the coin and white hot truth. I was like, finally, I'm like, good, I'm glad. Because the reality is for some people, like, I mean, I'll tell you, my meds have made a huge difference. I mean, I'm way more like, you know, stable, like mentally than I was then. Like I was at the point where I couldn't make public appearances. I like literally didn't go to conferences because I was like, anything could pretty much send me into a tailspin or reduce me to tears. So I was like, I'm not going anywhere near, you know, anybody that I'm not close to. And then the other thing is, I brought up relationships ending, but, this is something that people don't realize that, the relationships you have in your life, they have a huge impact. Everybody that you spend the majority of your time around, the people that you're close to, they have a really, really big impact on everything that you do. And, sometimes those are the people that are closest to you. And that's the scary part is, wait a minute, these are people. And so that's, I've parted ways with a lot of people that I worked very closely with, just because it was like, wow, this is like, not only is this relationship really strained, it's making me and you miserable. Yeah. The best thing for us to do is to part ways. We didn't always part ways on perfect terms. I think there's a book I think that I've been reading about, I've been reading a few books where they talk about the idea of forgiveness. And I think that what we do is we confuse forgiveness and forgetting, right? Like, you're not going to forget. Like when something shitty happens, you're going to remember, like what that person did. And I don't think forgiveness is about like welcoming back these people into your life with open arms. It's just about letting go of whatever baggage and resentment you have towards all of that. So therapy, medication, good friends, releasing toxic relationships, all easier said than done, especially the last part. But you just, the funniest thing I've read about this was Dan Kennedy's take on vendors who are stressful. And he said, if I woke up 3 mornings in a row and you're on my mind and we're not having sex, you have to go. I was like, that seems like a good policy for your vendors or people that you work with.
Yeah.
If that is the issue, like in a bad way, I was like, that was pretty funny, but it I think is an accurate sort of take on how you manage your relationships.
Yeah, I appreciate this, and you brought up Danielle, and I was going to tell you something funny earlier when you were saying the thing about putting people on pedestals, and even when people listen to this podcast, and even like the irresponsible level of consumption that you mentioned as well. Last November, I ran a whole 4-week training called Unconsume Yourself, where I said to people, even if I have to go, I'm fine with it because you need space. Like you need to take your life back. So the pedestal thing is so interesting because we see people and we fill in all kinds of details that we don't have. When it's for others, we fill it in positively. We assume the best of others, right? So the other weekend I was running a Wild Soul Movement weekend workshop in Vancouver. And one of my women, who's actually in my teacher training as well, made this comment. She's like, yeah, because you're human. And she paused and she went, you are human, right? And I started laughing so hard. I'm like, it's such a sweet compliment and also hilarious thing to hear at the same time. And she's like, recently I was reading White Hot Truth and I had to stop reading it 3 times because I kept getting so pissed off that Danielle Laporte is human. Because I think people it's the same reason why Wonder Woman just grossed $95 million its first weekend out in the theater at the time that we're recording this. People want heroes. Yeah. People want to think that it's possible for someone to be infallible because, and what this woman had reflected is, if Danielle Laporte isn't perfect and she's doing her work, it means I have to get out there and do my shit too because I'm not perfect either.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, it's, and that's the sort of weird, responsibility that comes with being a public figure, right? Like, how do you, in some strange way, you have an expectation. There are implications to all the things that you say, as our president is learning right now, So, it just and that's the thing. Like every little detail of what you do, what you live, what you say is scrutinized in a way that it's not. And the funny thing is, we talk about, we're talking about the people in our world like they're actually famous. But the reality is nobody gives a shit who we are.
I love that.
Does anybody recognize you when you go into Phil's as Liz D'Alto?
Sometimes.
The people that work there?
Not the people who work there, no. Exactly.
If you ask the people that work there, hey, ever heard of Seth Godin or Tim Ferriss? They're like, no. What are you talking about?
I love that. I love when I ask people, have you ever heard of a Danielle Laporte or a Marie Forleo? And they're like, no. And I'm like, oh, I love that. I love when people, because I just love meeting people that don't exist in the same friggin' bubble that I do.
Well, not only that, none of these people are as important as we made them out to be. No discredit to any of them. But the funny thing is, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie are famous. Yeah. Seth Godin is not famous. Relative.
Internet famous. Yeah, I appreciate that so much. And actually, even just being I'm nowhere near the status of like a Danielle Laporte or Seth Godin or Tim Ferriss or whomever, but even moments of, being recognized in certain places, or even just like online where you realize you shared something and then someone reflects back to you. Or I'll give a better example. I was at a wedding like a year and a half ago and I met someone. She's like, oh my God. And she proceeded to recite like the last 3 years of my life to me. And I'm like, damn, I shared all those things on the internet. Like, I gotta watch it. But it's so interesting. And I think about, have you read that, we'll put a link to it in the show notes, this recent, within like the last month or so, this epic interview with Brad Pitt. I think it was GQ or Esquire. Did you read it? Or have you heard about it? He talks about alcoholism. He talks about coming out of his divorce, dealing with his, he talks about some real shit, like some of the stuff we were just talking about. And it's so cool to hear a celebrity be like, this is my reality right now. Like a real, like a legit celebrity that like can't leave the house because paparazzi and stuff like that. And I wonder how that contributes to isolation and who you surround yourself with. Like, can you imagine being so famous that when you meet people, it's a real legitimate concern that like they just really want to like brush up against you and they're not there for authentic connection?
Well, that's, I think I like the Bob Goff saying, and he said to me once in an interview, he said, when you die, he's like, there's room for 8 people around your deathbed, 9 if they're thin, right? So I think to really kind of make that distinction between, fans and friends, like you could have thousands of fans, but really maybe 5 true friends, it's funny because I was writing about this notion of triggers this morning and why I don't read comments ever, because like for me, they're triggers. Like I know they'll cause me to hold back. And, Jonathan Fields made a comment about, but sometimes triggers are also, useful. I think part of it is discerning feedback, right? And it kind of takes us to the point of who do you, let into your inner world. And I think that for me, at least, the inner circle of people that I trust implicitly, like no questions asked, is actually very small.
Yeah.
It's not that big. I mean, because like, 1,000 fans is not the same as a few friends. There's a big difference.
Agree. And I see, this is a really interesting thing. I see people doing like the crowdsourcing around things like, I'm sick, what should I do? And it's like, why don't we ask qualified people? A mentor of mine once said there's like 4 different types of advice. There's asked for qualified advice, asked for unqualified advice, right? So that's like happening on Facebook every single day.
Sure, yeah.
Then there's like the unasked for qualified, where someone who actually knows what they're talking about weighs in, even though you didn't ask them. And then the unasked for unqualified. And that shit is the most rampant on social media.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think that it was, I was telling my business partner, Brian, last night, I said one of the best things I think that we ever did for our business was to stop looking at what other people were doing with theirs.
Totally. 100%. Every once in a while, I'll check in. And again, Srini and I are talking about business because we run businesses, but this could be anything. This could be parenting. This could be, your nutrition, how you move your body. Everyone is so different, kind of like we were talking about workflow earlier. So like check out what other people are doing, but you got to screen it through yourself. Like this is the whole core of everything I do and teach is like, you got to be able to use your own discernment. You have to be able to trust yourself.
Yeah, definitely.
And sometimes the only way you learn how to do that is the contrast of all the times you didn't and you got your ass handed to you.
Exactly.
Amazing. So we've talked mostly about your last book, Unmistakable, but you have a new book coming. What's this one focusing on? This is the more habit-oriented one, right?
Yeah. No. So I gave you a bit of a teaser to it. I mean, it is really about this idea of creative habits. The foundation of it was based on a piece that I wrote on Medium titled "How Writing 1,000 Words a Day Changed My Life." That ended up going viral in 2013, and 2 years later, my editor at Penguin found it. And when we were doing the book deal, it was just kind of they wanted to buy my self-published book, and next thing I know, I get a call from my agent says, well, there's been a development. They want to do a 2-book deal, not one. So they want you to write a book about the 1,000-word idea as well. So that book really, I think what we've done, I think I remember describing it this way. It's like if all the behavioral science books and all the creativity books, had some really twisted love child out of, a forbidden marriage, that's what this book would be.
I like it.
Because a lot of it is based on a combination of my experience, the experience of people that I've interviewed, as well as a lot of behavioral and social science. So like backing a lot of this up with real research that has been done.
I appreciate that. This is one of my favorite things about having a podcast. I'm not one to like just research things for the sake of it, but when someone brings something up, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I want to know more about that. And I know that happens for people listening all the time.
Yeah, totally.
Super cool. You don't have a name yet for the new book, do you? Or one that you're allowed to tell us?
No. Not that I'm allowed to tell you. As of right now, it's just literally the Google Doc is called Book 2. That's all it says right now. We've written an entire book and we have no title, which is bizarre.
Opening up the kimono to the creative process.
Exactly.
Just start before you're ready, right? It's called Book 2.
Pretty much.
I love your opinion on this. I see a lot of people wanting to put the cart before the horse creatively by I need to know the title, and then they become so attached to the title, and then that kind of dictates, well, then the book needs to be about this. But the fact that you're putting it together and like the title will come later, I think is probably a healthier way to do it. I don't know. Maybe not. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Like, I think this is, and I can't take credit for this. If people haven't read it, they should definitely check out Danny Shapiro's book, Still Writing, which really, I think, does the whole subject of writing a great deal of justice. It's one of the best books I've ever read on the subject. But, I mean, the thing is that everything about the work sort of reveals itself to you throughout the process. Yeah. The way I see it, like if you start out thinking that you have to know exactly where you're going to end up or what you're going to write, that's really paralyzing. Yeah. It's incredibly paralyzing because it's overwhelming. Like I remember, there's another piece on Medium about this that I wrote titled How I Finished Writing a 45,000 word manuscript in 6 months. And, the thing I mentioned was that when I first started Unmistakable, my previous book, like I remember, after the excitement of all, the book deal and the contracts and all that happens and you take those pictures that you get to put on social media, you're suddenly staring at a blank Google Doc and you're like, fuck, now I have to write a book, and that moment is can be very paralyzing because suddenly you realize there's a lot on the line here. Like everybody's expecting you to deliver. And so I think that if you think too much about the entire structure of it, it becomes very overwhelming. That's why you attack it literally one piece at a time. If I get 500 good words in a day, that's a really good day. Yeah,
this is, I don't listen to a lot of other podcasts. I have listened to a handful of Tim Ferriss podcasts, and he had Rick Rubin on once. Have you ever listened to that episode?
I don't think I've listened to it all the way through, but I know what you're talking about.
It was a couple years ago. It was super epic. I think I actually even listened more than once, even though it was like plus 2 hours, because they talk about like that creativity, the process. And Rick Rubin was saying that and by the way, if anyone listening doesn't know who Rick Rubin is, prolific music producer for decades now. And he was saying how, there's if musicians and artists are following like the formula because they know what sells, that's certainly going to stifle them creatively because they've already decided on the box that they need to fit, that the outcome, that the work, that the creation needs to fit into, versus the people that are doing the art because they can't not do the art. That's going to produce absolute masterpieces.
Yeah, no, and that's true. Not that, I would call anything that I produced a masterpiece, but yeah, I think that you produce much better work when you're not like, dead set on it has to go a certain way.
Well, and personal masterpiece, right? So maybe not in the broad, overwhelming culture of people who write and epic works of all time, but maybe in your own body of work. You never know.
Yeah.
Sure. Cool. I love Definitely. This. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you were like chomping at the bit to share, or any open loop that I didn't close? Because I do that sometimes.
No, I think you covered a good amount of it. I think, the one thing that I think I'd mentioned to you when we'd spoken in the past was this event idea that I'm working on that is currently in progress. And we've started to confirm speakers, and we have a date and a location. So it's kind of nutty. I think the thing that I've been wanting to do for a very long time, and it's coincidentally this is all going to probably have to happen before I turn 40, just based on everybody's availability. But it'll be a nice sort of, hey, I did this before I was 40. The next thing I'm working on is putting together an event where everybody in the room, speakers and attendees, are people that I have interviewed on Unmistakable Creative, like an invite-only gathering of insanely interesting people.
I love it. I can't wait to come. So after we stop the recording, you can tell me where it is and what are the details. All right, Srini, thank you so much. I could geek out on creative process, on habits, on all this stuff until the end of time because I find it endlessly interesting. And, this is kind of the world we're living in now. The world we're living in right now really actually welcomes and is kind of set up to be to the advantage of the person who's willing to be creative and take the risks. And, anyone who listens to this podcast, who loves podcasts, you got to check out Srini's podcast. It's called The Unmistakable Creative. And, that's the fun part. He really goes to town on these unmistakable people. So they're not always people that you've heard of, not just like the big names who everyone knows in like self-help or coaching or spirituality. Really goes outside the box and really looks for very, very, very fascinating and interesting people, which I'm now being reminded that in the event that I do listen to podcasts, I got to cue some unmistakable episodes back up that I've been like holding on to for a while. So thank you so much for being here. We'll put all the links. You mentioned books. You mentioned other things, articles on Medium. We'll find all of them and put them in the show notes. Cool. So thank you. We'll see you later.
Thanks, Liz.
So that's listen, but also be able to recognize where those problems intersect with your abilities and your passion. Yeah. Because if you're not passionate about it, then don't do it. Yes. If one of those people if you're in a business and people who follow you run into you in person and they want to talk about stuff in your business, if you want to run the other way, you probably want to get out of that business. And that's where I was with Underground Wellness. I no longer wanted to hang out with those people. Not that I have any problem with those people, but I didn't want to talk about gluten and the difference between celiac and non-celiac gluten sensitivity and lectins and all this stuff. Like I was done. Yeah. Right. And, I think there's this cycle that I read about recently called, create, persist, destroy, create, persist, destroy. And that's the cycle of our lives. I had to get to the point with Underground Wellness where I said, this isn't fulfilling me anymore. And I'm starting to get a little angry about it. Yeah. I think a lot of people are in that with their jobs right now. They've been in it for like 10, 20 years, maybe. They've been in that cycle of destroy. Like, I'm not digging this anymore. But then we have to make the choice to get rid of it in order to create something new.